On a rainy evening in Washington, D.C., two young diplomats, Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram, stepped into the night, their laughter echoing out of the Capitol Jewish Museum. Moments later, gunshots shattered the peace. Within seconds, headlines around the world blazed. Israeli embassy staffers brutally murdered in America's capital, the accused gunman shouting, "Free, free Palestine," as he was wrestled to the ground. What turned this symbol of international dialogue into the scene of a targeted attack? And more importantly, how did an online world of echo chambers, extremism, and digital manifestos transform a quiet administrative worker into a headline-making terrorist? Tonight, we unravel the unprecedented convergence of global politics, technology-fueled radicalization, and the intensifying conflict shaping our world. Are we seeing the dawn of a new era where online rage erupts into real-world violence and no safe haven remains for diplomats, communities, or even the very idea of peaceful discourse? Let's journey behind the scenes of one of the most shocking attacks on U.S. soil in recent memory and trace the global economic and technological currents that made it possible and maybe inevitable. It began as a celebration. The young diplomats' reception at the Capitol Jewish Museum wasn't just another event on D.C.'s busy calendar. Organized by the American Jewish Committee, the evening was about building bridges, a gathering of Jewish professionals, international diplomats, and advocates for peace in the Middle East and North Africa. The venue itself, deeply symbolic, a museum dedicated to Jewish contributions, resilience, and the story of migration. Sarah Milgram, one of the victims, was a passionate volunteer with Tech2Peace, an organization teaching entrepreneurship to young Israelis and Palestinians. The cause was close to her heart: innovation, dialogue, and hope for the future. Beside her was Yaron Lashinsky, a man celebrated for both his devotion to Israel and his mixed faith heritage. As his friend Jacob Klepek later recalled, Yaron stood out not just for his intelligence, but his generosity of spirit. But that hope, so tangible that night, was about to be shattered by forces that had been brewing far from the museum's stately halls. In the months leading up to the attack, the world had been riveted and horrified by the escalating Israel-Hamas conflict, triggered by Hamas's dramatic incursion on October 7, 2023. That event set off a cascading wave of violence, outrage, and polarizing debate. In the United States, that wave translated into a sharp spike in both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. The result? Jewish institutions increased security, pro-Palestinian protests grew louder, and simmering online conflicts spilled into the streets. Yet, as security experts repeatedly warn, the greatest threats often emerge not with the masses, but at the intersection of ideology and opportunity. FBI official Stephen J. Jensen called the killings an act of terror and directed violence against the Jewish community, a scene chillingly reminiscent of past attacks on embassies, synagogues, and cultural centers worldwide. So, who was the man who pierced this celebration with bullets? Elias Rodriguez, previously unknown outside his Chicago neighborhood, was about to become the face of a new, disturbing trend. Not a career criminal, nor a trained operative. His background? Leftist political activism, including brief involvement with the Party for Socialism and Liberation in 2017, an administrative specialist by day, a digital citizen with social media feeds filled with pro-Palestinian messages, reposted Hezbollah speeches, and, reportedly, a manifesto posted online titled "Escalate for Gaza, Bring the War Home." That last detail is especially chilling, a call for globalizing the Middle East conflict and making it personal in Western capitals. Investigators pieced together a chilling premeditation. The murder weapon, a 9mm handgun, was legally purchased years prior. Rodriguez declared it in checked luggage, flying from Chicago to D.C. just 2 days before the attack. In his window at home, a sign, "Tikkun Olam," means Free Palestine. What could make a person cross this line? Was it years of political engagement morphing into radicalism? Was it the power of online echo chambers where extremist content is never more than a click away? Oren Siegel of the Anti-Defamation League offered a grim assessment. The online ecosystem opposed to Israel created an environment that made the tragedy more likely. But it wasn't just the digital realm fueling the fire. The streets, too, were ablaze: rallies, counter-protests, and a growing sense of siege on both sides of the conflict. Earlier in the year, an American Air Force member, Aaron Bushnell, made headlines by setting himself alight outside the Israeli embassy in protest, a gesture Rodriguez reportedly admired, referring to Bushnell as a martyr in his online writings. D.C., normally a city of processions and politics, now found itself at the crossroads of global conflict and personal vendetta. The museum, meant to promote dialogue, became the latest battlefield, a target selected precisely for its symbolism, a place where diplomacy, culture, and memory converged, and where security, tragically, could not keep out the threat. As Ted Deutsch, CEO of the American Jewish Committee, mourned, "Sarah and Yaron were stolen from us. They were smiling and laughing moments before they were murdered." But the implications of this act of terror extend far beyond two lives cut short. First, for the United States, a nation already wrestling with political polarization, this shooting ripped open old wounds. Political leaders scrambled for the right words. Jeanine Pirro, interim U.S. Attorney, declared, "Violence against anyone based on their religion is an act of cowardice. Anti-Semitism will not be tolerated, especially in the nation's capital." Second, for Israel, whose diplomats have faced a long history of targeted violence worldwide, the attack was a brutal reminder that hatred remains global. Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Yechiel Leiter, summed up the pain. The couple that was gunned down in the name of Free Palestine were about to be engaged. But perhaps most worrying is the realization that the digital age has shifted the contours of extremism. The suspect's devices and social media are now key evidence, not just of a crime, but of a process. Radicalization happening at the speed of broadband. Expert voices warn of a global surge in anti-Semitic incidents. Michael D. Shear of the New York Times called this killing an extreme example of what law enforcement officials and others call a global surge in anti-Semitic incidents. Yet this isn't just about anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. It's about the weaponization of outrage, online, algorithmically amplified, and increasingly impossible to contain. The same channels meant to foster community and free expression are being twisted into pipelines for calls to action, and, at times, bloodshed. As law enforcement sifts through the digital detritus, manifestos, videos, reposts, the larger dilemma looms. How should societies balance the free flow of information with the need to stop hate from metastasizing? Tech companies now face renewed calls to police extremist content. Civil libertarians warn against overreach, and minority communities brace themselves for backlash. The next wave of hate crimes could target Muslims as easily as Jews, as cycles of retaliation and suspicion spiral outward. Diplomatically, the attack threatens to strain U.S. relations not only with Israel, but with countries carrying large pro-Palestinian populations. Should the investigation reveal ties to transnational extremist groups, pressure will mount for new surveillance, new policies, maybe even new legislation, a scenario with sweeping economic and political consequences for tech companies, law enforcement, and vulnerable communities alike. And still at the core remain unanswered questions. Why did Elias Rodriguez, an otherwise ordinary individual, become convinced that murder was the path to justice for Gaza? Was it online radicalization alone, or is there a deeper malaise, a sense of hopelessness, amplified by algorithms, waiting for its moment to explode? And just as crucial, if technology now connects us more closely than ever, why does it so often seem to divide us further, driving good intentions to the margins and elevating the loudest, angriest, most extreme voices? As the world waits for answers, the Justice Department faces pressure to act decisively, considering even the death penalty. Meanwhile, Jewish communities tighten security, and debates rage. Can the online spread of hate and extremism be stopped before the next attack? Or is this the new reality, where diplomatic receptions, places of worship, and even our digital spaces are all potential front lines in a war unleashed by pixels, rhetoric, and a global network of grievances? The story of that night in Washington is not over. In the second half, we'll examine the technological arms race between radicalization and prevention, the economic costs of rising security, and the hidden trade-offs threatening the very freedoms our societies hold dear. But first, let's pause on the most urgent question. If even museums and peace events are now targets, what can actually be done to protect open societies from the dark side of our interconnected world? As investigators comb through Elias Rodriguez's online activity, the world is left grappling with a set of urgent and complicated questions. The murder of 2 Israeli embassy staffers on American soil is more than a headline. It's a seismic event reverberating across political, technological, and cultural fault lines. What comes next? Is this tragedy a warning of further escalation, or can it be the shock that galvanizes change? The answer lies in understanding where we are headed, technologically, socially, and geopolitically. Imagine for a moment what the near future could hold. Picture Jewish community centers, museums, synagogues, not just in Washington, D.C., but from Berlin to Buenos Aires, turning into fortresses, with metal detectors, armed guards, and facial recognition cameras at every entrance. Every public event, every cultural celebration, shadowed by a whisper of fear. Already, following the shooting, local police have ramped up patrols at Jewish sites, while embassies worldwide are reviewing their security protocols. The message is clear: vulnerability is no longer theoretical. But strengthened security is just one layer of this new reality. There's a grimmer possibility, a spiral of tit-for-tat violence, one incident inspiring the next, each amplified and distorted by online echo chambers. Experts like Oren Siegel of the Anti-Defamation League warn, the online ecosystem opposed to Israel created an environment that made the tragedy more likely. He's not alone. Analysts now routinely track a surge in hate crimes after every flashpoint in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Synagogues desecrated, schools threatened, individuals harassed based on identity. The digital sphere becomes a battlefield where words precede weapons. Now imagine the policy response. Lawmakers under immense pressure rush to pass new laws. Some call for aggressive action, monitoring social media, tracking would-be extremists, holding tech platforms legally responsible for hate speech. Others, however, push back, invoking freedoms of speech and political activism, fearful that broad new powers could be turned on legitimate protest. U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro cautions, violence against anyone based on their religion is an act of cowardice. Anti-Semitism will not be tolerated, especially in the nation's capital. But how do we distinguish between dissent and incitement, between activism and extremism? Each policy debate becomes a proxy battle for deeper divisions over identity, security, and civil rights. The diplomatic fallout is equally complex. The U.S. must reassure Israel its diplomats are safe, justice will be done. But at the same time, American officials face pressure from communities angered by what they see as one-sided support for Israel. Internationally, whispers begin. Was this lone wolf truly alone? Is there a hidden network? The very fabric of U.S.-Israeli relations is subtly, but undeniably, strained. Allies like Germany and Qatar publicly condemn the shooting, but behind closed doors, old tensions simmer. In the private sector, tech giants face unprecedented scrutiny. Investigators probe Rodriguez's digital footprints, his manifesto, social media reposts, encrypted chats. Were warning signs missed? Could hashtags have predicted his intent? Silicon Valley faces a dilemma: protect privacy and free expression, or preemptively take down content that could radicalize the next attacker. Platforms like X and Facebook accelerate their internal reviews, deploying new AI filters to catch violent rhetoric. But with each tweak, accusations of bias flare up. No action is neutral in today's landscape. And then there's the human cost, multiplying quietly in the shadows. Families of the victims, Sarah Milgram and Yaron Lashinsky, are left with unanswerable questions. Sarah, who volunteered to build bridges between Palestinians and Israelis, is memorialized as a casualty not just of violence, but of the collapse of dialogue. Yaron, remembered for his generosity, becomes a symbol, a life ended not because of who he hated, but who he tried to help. Their deaths become rallying cries for both peace and division, depending on who's listening. All these threads lead us back to the digital realm, a proving ground for extremism, empathy, and everything in between. With every retweet, every video, every online manifesto, the line between the virtual and the real grows thinner. As one FBI expert put it, this is an extreme example of what law enforcement officials and others call a global surge in anti-Semitic incidents. And still, the algorithms churn, amplifying the most inflammatory voices. But what can be done? What practical lessons emerge from this tragedy for governments, tech companies, and most importantly, viewers like you? First, be vigilant about the information you consume and share. Echo chambers radicalize when individuals seek only confirmation, not challenge. Diversifying your information diet is more than intellectual curiosity, it's civic responsibility. Before sharing that viral video, ask, who made this? What's their agenda? As we've seen, digital myths can have deadly consequences. Second, demand more from our leaders and institutions. Security cannot come at the expense of civil liberties, but neither can free speech be a shield for incitement to violence. Push your representatives to champion nuanced policies, ones that target true threats, not blanket surveillance. Insist on transparency from tech platforms regarding their moderation policies and algorithms. It's your data, your security, and your democracy at stake. Third, support organizations that foster dialogue and resilience. Groups like Tech2 Peace, where Sarah Milgram volunteered, show that even in dark times, bridge building is possible. Community forums, educational programs, and interfaith initiatives are more vital than ever. If you have the means, volunteer or donate. If you don't, amplify their message. Every link in the chain of understanding counts. Fourth, look critically at the incentives in the digital economy. Outrage gets clicks. Division is profitable. Platforms are designed to keep you engaged, sometimes by showing you the very content most likely to inflame. By recognizing these patterns, you can disrupt them. Spend less time doom scrolling, more time in real conversations, both online and off. And finally, recognize the power of memory and mourning. When we honor the victims, we remind ourselves what is at stake: lives, dreams, the fragile threads that hold together diverse societies. Michael D. Shear at the New York Times noted, "This is an extreme example of what law enforcement officials and others call a global surge in anti-Semitic incidents. Behind each incident are names, faces, families. Don't let them become statistics." So, can technology and policy really keep extremism in check, or are we doomed to an escalation of violence? The answer, uncomfortable as it may be, is both yes and no. Technology is a tool. It can amplify hate or foster understanding. Policy can deter violence or stoke further resentment, depending on how it's crafted and enforced. There will never be a perfect solution, no algorithm that can spot every threat, no law that can anticipate every act of hate. Yet that does not mean helplessness. Every choice matters. Law enforcement can invest in better threat assessment and community outreach, instead of just surveillance. Tech companies can build in friction, pop-ups that challenge users before posting inflammatory content, or warnings when conspiracy narratives begin to trend. Civil society can expand education programs that teach media literacy and online citizenship, making future Rodriguez less likely. Ultimately, however, the battle is not just fought by governments, corporations, or even activists. It's fought by ordinary people who refuse to be swept into digital mobs, who call out hate when they see it, who build bridges even as others tear them down. The story of Sarah and Yaron is a tragedy, yet the truest tribute to their memory is to reject the logic of division. There's a secret fact that rarely makes headlines. Almost every successful act of hate is preceded by dozens, sometimes hundreds, of acts of quiet heroism, tips called in, friendships across barriers, algorithms tweaked, conversations held. But we seldom hear of them, precisely because they prevent tragedy. What history records are the failures? Yet for every Rodriguez, there are countless unnamed people refusing to be radicalized, refusing to give in to the easy lies of hate. So if you take one thing away from this story, let it be this: the future will be shaped by what we do next, by whether we demand more from our institutions and ourselves, by whether we choose dialogue or division, by whether we remain awake to both the promise and the peril of technology. If you found this video thought-provoking, don't keep the conversation to yourself. Share it with someone who disagrees with you. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or even your fears. Subscribe for more deep dives into the stories shaping our world.